Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Navin, brilliant to have you here today. To start with, could you please introduce yourself and tell people about the great work that you do?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. My name is Navin Goyal, and um, I'm a gentleman who resides in the United States. First career was a anesthesiologist, practiced for 13 years, and the goal was to work really hard to focus on one career. And then life hits you, and challenges hit you, and opportunities hit you, and you realize that we are constantly evolving. And so I started to change and had other opportunities. One of them was starting a healthcare services company in 2014, which brought me into the entrepreneurial world as a founder, which was extremely challenging, but extremely fulfilling and exciting. And as I was kind of leveling out with my learning curve in the field of anesthesiology, as I was practicing, I was getting very excited about building and growing a business. And so that brought me into, deeper learning into entrepreneurship and business and curiosity. And eventually, I started a fund to help fuel these entrepreneurial ventures. Outside of personal investing, I kind of decided to go the next level and bring other people in. And so that became more funds in a firm and a philosophy called Loud Capital, which is to be loud and active in our investments outside of just capital. And so by the end of 13 years of practicing, I left my practice to run a venture capital firm full time.
Okay.
And in doing so, with the career change and all the skills that I needed to learn, I was also investing in myself, and I was also sharing through content. And I would start posting on LinkedIn, and I've done a lot of podcasts. I ended up writing a book on this transition called Physician Underdog. And I continue to appreciate and see the power of content while building and investing in businesses. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Thank you, Naveen. And that transition must be quite unusual, right? For somebody to go from being a technical specialist to being a venture capitalist.
It's extremely unusual, but the more I tie in the core principles and things that I've learned outside of the technical skills, there was a lot of mental exercises and agility that needed to be a successful anesthesiologist, and I've applied that in many facets of business.
Cool. And the venture capital world has always fascinated me from a distance because on the one hand they seem to get a bit of a bad rep in terms of how they
Mm-hmm.
behave. But on the other side of that coin, there's the kind of gambling that you're involved in because, who knows which businesses are going to fly and which ones are not. So could you give people a brief insight into that space?
Yeah, and I do think it has a bad rap for a reason. I think there are plenty of people and firms that exist in the industry that lead with profits, and that's not the only industry. I think there's other industries that do that. However, what really piqued my interest is the power of capital to fuel solutions. And so, my first venture, I raised venture capital. So I'm experienced in understanding those decisions and the willingness to take money and what you give in exchange. And so you sometimes lose control, you lose equity, all these kinds of things. And so I empathize with the process of an entrepreneur of building something and figuring out how to scale or how to, reach profitability quicker or keeping it under your control. But with that experience, I feel like I can be a good mentor and advisor when someone decides to take venture capital, if this relationship will work out, and then to be, again, empathetic along the journey of a founder when you're on the investor side. And I don't think that piece exists as much as I would like to. But I'm not here to change the industry or the world. I just am controlling what I can control. And we are doing that with our venture firm. And we are seeing really great success, not with our performance, but with the process of founders and them kind of being fulfilled in whatever journey they take.
Great. And just finally, before we move on to the values jam, are you focused on the healthcare sector only, or do you step outside of that?
Yeah, so currently focused on the healthcare industry within venture. Early on, we were industry agnostic and invested in multiple things, but as time has gone on and I realize the lack of experience in healthcare that's in the venture world, um, myself and the team feel confident, competent, and extremely excited to bring more experience around the table to uplift a lot of ventures.
Okay. And I did a small piece of work for a healthcare company out of Boston last year, and it seems that there is much needed focus on the customer experience in that sector,
Absolutely.
but they struggle to understand how they're actually going to do it, and they seem to use the regulatory environment as a bit of an excuse for not touching some places.
Yes, yes. There is a lot of opportunity in healthcare for various reasons, but there's a lot of money being spent on inefficient or antiquated systems that are not serving people. And so that is an obvious thing, but the more you peel back, you look at leadership, extremely old school, antiquated. You look at culture, probably one of the worst I've seen. And which is really interesting, where leadership and culture are very old school, and yet, all these healers are coming into the system and getting spit out, and all these patients are not being served. So, like, not a lot is working there. The good news is there is opportunity to take what pieces exist and just, reshape them to
Yeah.
serve more people accessibly and sustainably. I know a lot of people are on the side of, completely destroying it and recreating, but just like any business, there's some beautiful things in that, and we can take some of that and just kind of shift direction. So those are kind of holistically how I look at healthcare today.
Cool. All right. So this is the Values Jam card deck, and I'm just going to tip the cards out. How many piles would you like me to make in front of me, Naveen?
3.
Three piles. Okay. They're different sizes. And would you like pile one on my left, pile three on my right, or the one in the middle?
Let's go right.
Okay. So now I've got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 20 cards. So a number between 1 and 20.
7.
7. Okay. So what's your first reaction to this? Balance.
Priority.
Okay. So first question is this. What does balance mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Balance to me means comfortable with a life we've created. And in my stage in life, I feel pretty balanced. And so that's where this is coming from, because I have been prioritizing what is really important to me, which took a lot of introspection. And so when it comes to family, work, service, growth, all those are in a really great balance for me.
It's interesting that you use the word comfortable because I relate to what you were saying there about balancing those different parts of your life. But I never feel that I'm balanced. I always feel that I'm having to adjust, like
Yeah.
I've got a picture in my mind of a tightrope walker who's always kind of just doing this, tweaking it so that you don't fall off, but you never feel like, oh yeah, this is fine. So that's different for you, right?
Oh, very, yeah, actually, I'll expand upon and relate to what you just said. I am comfortable knowing that there's discomfort in that.
Yeah.
So it's almost comfortable because I expect tomorrow to be a challenge to balance my life. And instead of questioning it, why this is happening, or getting hard, being hard on myself,
Yeah.
I now say, hey, today's my opportunity to prioritize this and prioritize that. And I think I am going towards successful in doing that day to day. And so that's what I say about comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm really getting comfortable not knowing things and being ready to kind of solve those challenges.
So two things to share with you on that point. I heard a story about, and I never found out whether this is true, but apparently the guy that invented Tai Chi, he was teaching his students, and one of his students said to him, Master, how is it that you always are balanced, whereas the rest of us, we're not? And he said, that's not true at all. It's just that I regain my balance quicker than you. And I think that's a really smart
Yeah,
answer.
I love that.
And then the other one, a guy, excuse me, a guy in Scotland, a doctor, he told me that the way he deals with things not kind of happening the way you were expecting, he gave me the example of, if you need to take a bus across town and you've got to get to an appointment on time, and then the bus doesn't show up when it's supposed to show up, so you're going to be late. He said the way he deals with that is he says to himself, "So that's the way it is it?" And then he decides what to do next. So rather than getting consumed with, "Oh, I'm going to be late and where's the bus and why did it happen?" Waste of energy. You just need to decide what you're going to do next.
I love that. And it kind of reminds me of just, you know, philosophically about moving on and not getting stuck on something that just happened. And last few years I've been into golf, and
Oh,
Tiger Woods used to say, at least my friend told me Tiger Woods said this, so I'm assuming he did, but it makes sense, which is, you hit a bad shot or you hit something unexpected, you have kind of the right to basically be upset, but you have to be done by the next shot, right? So allow yourself to, okay, be emotional, do your thing, but the next shot, clear head, focus on this. And it kind of reminds me of that. And I mean, I think that is so important for anything. And that's what we're talking about. Like, I think if I would wake up a year ago, I would be stressed about balance, like, oh my God, I got so much, whatever. I'm not saying I have it figured out, but I feel like my mentality is a little bit more focused to your first story, which is just get back up, and quicker, um, and I think that's it right there. And it's like I'm still scared. I'm still all these emotions. I just give a little bit less weight to and a little bit less time to, but I acknowledge them. I have them. In fact, I put myself into positions where they could be way bigger, but it's just accepting that that's part of my atmosphere and moving on.
okay. So what we're touching on here is balance being more about mindset and mentality than a physical state, right?
Yeah, I'm a very big mindset person. It's what I nerd out on all the time.
And you mentioned Tiger Woods, and I think I admire other great sports people, and I think they really, those at the top of their field, you'll hear them say, when you win a tournament or whatever it is, don't get too carried away with yourself. And when you fail to qualify for the final of something, don't be too bad on yourself. Just focus on what you need to do different and get on with it. Again, it's this thing about what's done is done, and that's it. And I know it sounds really simple, but it's so true.
It's focusing also on the process versus the outcome. And really great coaches, Nick Saban, um, will say, like, great, you won, or we won by 50. People are celebrating, and he'll say, but did we do our best? Did we do our best like we do in practice? Did we show up? If so, okay, great. But tomorrow's another game, or tomorrow's another day. And people were, like, oh my gosh, you never smiled, never celebrated. However, that attitude is what builds high standards. And so I think going back to balance, it's the balance of being disciplined, motivated, and focusing on your efforts and allowing yourself to celebrate and be grateful. But that's a balance too, right? Versus celebrating because we won this champion so much that we now lose that edge or lose that hunger for what's next. And I think it's just a balance.
Dead right. And I think one of the ways to help you do that, I've started recently to ask people about a time or a specific incident or event or whatever it is that they have been very proud of because they've succeeded in something, they've made some sort of achievement. And so, yet people obviously they like talking about that sort of stuff. And then I ask them to think about the percentage they contributed personally to that outcome versus external factors and influences. And most times people realize that they played a small part in it, actually, because if it hadn't been for that introduction by somebody else, or if it hadn't been for that competitor falling over when they weren't expected to do it, or whatever. And so you used the word success a short while ago, and I think those two words, success and failure, in terms of balance, are really bad words because they're emotion laden and we get carried away with them. Whereas, in fact, if we added a bit of balance in there, I think a lot of people would be a whole lot better off and not kind of glorify something when it does happen to be successful, but perhaps really not because of what you did. And the same with failure, because a lot of the time we don't fail because we want to. We made those choices and decisions to the best of our ability. And so is that really a failure? Oftentimes it's not. It's just a matter of circumstance and context, right?
He's exactly right. I think it's all perspective. And, you know, I use failure a lot, but I've been trying to think more of like, lessons, right? There's always lessons. Um, and failure sounds so permanent,
Yeah.
failure sounds like so permanent. And it's literally like falling down and calling that, I permanently fell, right? It's almost like, you know, I'm probably not making any sense, but I think failure should be more of like a fall and we get up,
Yeah.
and versus like this label.
Yeah.
But again, it's all perspective, and some people call it failure as long as it doesn't keep you down, as long as it doesn't prohibits you from moving forward, then I don't care what you say in your head. And I think that's really important. And some of the discussions on fear, I've recently processed that fear is around me, and what I do is I use that fear to fuel me forward. I don't have fear stop me from acting or moving forward, and that's what fear does for many. And the way I've shifted that is very much on the mindset. On you're never going to have a fear-free journey, and if you do, you are on the wrong journey. And you are not growing. You are too comfortable. But fear also means you care, right? And so if you care, you should always have fear present, and yeah, use that to help you and guide you.
So do you have children, Navi?
I do. I have two daughters, 16 and 14.
Right. Okay. So it's quite a while. My kids are grown up too, but I do remember, when they're learning to walk, for instance, and you talking about failure. Imagine if a kid fell over the first time and said, "Oh, that's it, I'm done."
It's exactly right. You never hear the child complain and say, "Ah." They just get back up. We can learn a lot from kids.
Yeah. So what about if we go to the more creative side of our brains and answer that question, the metaphor side? So when you think of balance, what images come to mind? What sounds come to mind? And what feelings come to mind?
Um, I'm not promoting anything, but I'm going to show you the cover of my book, which reminds me of balance.
Nicely done.
Yeah. So, what we see is not what you get, and a lot of it is inside you and perspective and mindset. So, when I think of balance, that image comes to mind naturally.
I, I've got to tell this story to so many people now. I said to this guy, what image comes to mind when you think of balance? And he said, oh, the cover of my book.
Yeah, that image has just been so powerful for me because it's all can be created within us, and I'm a very big on personal development and growth, and um, I call it fitness for the mind, body, and business. Is kind of what I like to talk about.
Okay. How did the book come about?
So it's called Physician Underdog, and just my with my career change, I find myself explaining my story very often on how, why, is this common, is this uncommon, and eventually I just started writing the story down. And actually, originally it was because a medical publisher, a very large medical publisher, one that I know very well in the sense of I've read their books in medical school because we had to, reached out and asked me to write a chapter for them, kind of an innovation in anesthesiology. I said, wow, I've never been asked to do that. Sure. And they said, we'd just love to write about, your experience because you have a unique experience. So I wrote about it. I wrote this chapter. I brought an editor on to help me out. And then I feel like I just could write so much more. I said, man, this is a chapter. So I started writing, and I eventually that editor helped me with the book. So that's kind of how it started. But it really is my story and detailed into all my expectations, how it shifted, the moves I made, the unknown territory, but how it's made me grow and it's empowered me. And I like to tell people I'm a very empowered individual. I'm not overconfident. I don't think I'm better than anyone else, but I'm empowered. So I feel like I can do things with other people, and everything I've done is in teams. And that's kind of I would say one of my life's missions is to empower other people. And it's why one of the big reasons I write content. Even in my friend circle and stuff, I'm a person who supports people and am optimistic and trying to be there because I feel like if you can become empowered, you can do anything, and that's what I'm trying to instill in my daughters.
Great. And there's a couple of things. Just go back to you mentioned fear a little bit earlier on. Have you come across Susan David's work?
Susan David.
So her
Um,
book, Emotional Agility.
oh, I've heard of it. I have not read it.
Okay, I recommend it. It's great.
Okay.
Um, and what she talks about is how courage is not the absence of fear. It's walking with fear by your side. And
Yeah.
I think that's a really great way to look at it. So when you mentioned that, it reminded me. Um, and then the other thing you're talking about being empowered, my daughter shared with me many years ago. She went on a kind of self-development half-day course or whatever it was. And she shared that the guy leading the session explained that when you're going to go into any situation where you're under pressure, like an interview, for instance, it's a good idea to, just before you go into that setting, remind yourself of all the good things that you've been told you do and all of the successes that you've had. And he described this as your dinosaur tail behind you. And I just love that image because, imagine you
Interesting.
walking into the room, and of course, the context in terms of balance is that if you've got that strong tail behind you, nobody can knock you over, right?
Wow, that's interesting. I've never heard that. That's really interesting. I like it.
Yeah. It's what it just to add a little bit to that, I remembered not too long ago that my grandmother used to say that people should follow their nose. And I kind of made a connection to a lot of the work that I do now, which is about values for individuals and organizations, and that being your guiding light. And I thought, I wonder if that was my grandmother's way of saying, follow your value, follow your nose.
Yeah.
And then when Lucy told me the story about the dinosaur tail, I now talk about following your nose and having your dinosaur tail. And
Oh, I love that.
I did a talk at a graduation dinner, and afterwards, several people came up and they said, "I've just got this brilliant image in my head now of this dinosaur following its nose with this strong tail behind it."
Yeah, and it's almost like, not to dilute what you just said, because that's beautiful, is it's also like following the future of what you can be and where you want to be, but appreciating what you've done.
Yeah, yeah,
Like your future and your past, and
yeah,
it's striving forward, but it's always bringing your I would say even confidence and experience and things you've done, because you're gonna be okay as you move forward, you know.
yeah. So let's move on and let's get more nitty-gritty and practical about balance now. So, where have you noticed a lack of balance?
Where have I noticed a lack of balance? Hmm. I mentioned that I approach every day with trying to balance my priorities. And I will say sometimes it's gray, even if I have my priorities listed out. So family and business and relationships, sometimes I feel like if I'm with my family, and I'm not mentally present, am I checking this off as a, hey, I'm balanced because I'm spending time with my family, but am I really there? And so one of the things that I have had challenges with is truly understanding quality versus quantity.
Yeah.
And I realize with my daughters, 10 minutes of pure presence and focus is so fulfilling to me, and I could tell is meaningful to them, that might be enough, let's say for that day over that time period.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't used to think about it that way. So I'm still learning from it, of course, but I have realized that, and it's given me permission to be human. And so, I can't spend an hour on this and 2 hours on this and 2 hours on this every single day. Or I shouldn't say can't, I won't. But I think that's been an interesting journey.
It's a really fascinating point because we're kind of conditioned to assess everything in a very scientific, objective way, right? But it's not the way the world works. And you've reminded me that the whole piece about family, you reminded me of a guy, he was a motivational trainer, I guess, for want of a better description. But one of his techniques, because he said, after a hard day at work, I'd go home, but I was really conscious that I can't just go into the house and be tired because I've had a hard day at work. And so the way he used to deal with that was when he put the key in the latch and turned it, he regarded as that as his ignition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Oh, that's powerful.
yeah. So then he was him for his family,
Oh
rather
my God, I
than at
love
the
that.
end of his day. Um, yeah, good guy. He's called Marcus Child if you're interested to look him up. Um, and then, like you say, sometimes there's a bit of a temptation to get into oh, well, I need to spend a day with my family. But if you're kind of zoned out and not really engaged, it was a waste of a day.
Totally, totally. And I've been guilty of many of those instances, and both sides, even being with someone who's not present. I mean, you just notice that and you're like, what are we doing here? So, I'm trying to be better about that. And not just because it's good to do, that this is life. I mean, if you're not present with people around you, or with an intentional setup of a scenario. So I go to meet a friend and I am not present because I'm on my phone or doing something, whatever. What is the purpose of this potential last day of your life? And that's not a morbid thing. That's a gratitude thing for me. So it's still a lot of learning and growth, but I'm really glad to be thinking about that more often.
And I suppose I don't want us to push it into the balance space, but it strikes me that there is a balance between understanding what you're doing versus the bigger picture. And
Yes.
you've reminded me of I like photography, and my partner bought me a photography day to photograph owls. So they're not wild owls. They're captive owls, but they're allowed to fly around the wooded area and stuff like this. And as photographers, you can then get good shots that you normally wouldn't be able to get. But I remember trying a few times to get shots, and getting some that were okay, and others that were completely, like no bird. But then I remember seeing this beautiful owl just gliding between the trees. I didn't even lift my camera because I just wanted to enjoy it. And I've got that video in my head now. And, okay, I won't be able to show anybody, but that was a choice that I made in that moment. Even though I was on my photography day, what was more important was to experience the beauty of that one moment. So there,
Yeah.
I think that relates to what you were describing, where you made a choice where realized what the bigger picture was rather than being a slave to the detail of what you'd set out to do.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point, specific point too, is kind of taking pictures of experiences versus experiencing them. And taking pictures that has its own fulfillment. But I think that's a huge thing with all of us nowadays with our phones. And I'm extremely guilty, but I can tell you in even the last couple months, I've been a lot better about it, which is keep my phone in because whatever picture I want to take a picture of, what is that really for? It's probably going to stay in here, probably won't be shared. Even if it is shared, like what is it for versus experiencing it? There's nothing like it. And so that's another challenge that I'm, attacking daily, but I feel like I'm making progress on it.
Mhm. I can relate to what you just said because I attended an event recently in Italy, and I was very conscious and I felt a bit out of sorts actually because everybody was taking photos of everything.
Yeah.
And at dinner one evening, I said to this lady, "Do you mind me asking why do you take so many photos?" And her daughter, her grown-up daughter, was with us, and she said, "Yeah, Mom, why? Why do you do it? Because they're just on your phone, and you never do anything with them."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she kind of admitted that she might share one or two, but she had the intention maybe of putting a compilation together, but she's had the same intention of other events and she hasn't done it. So it is a bit of a weird thing, I suppose, because it's so easy to do and we don't think of it all the way through.
Yeah. An example I've thought of because we just celebrated Diwali last week
Yeah,
and we went to some parties with the fireworks and stuff. That is a perfect example of a picture or video of fireworks does nothing to the justice of experiencing that in person. And so that's something where I do not take pictures of. I have just look up at the sky and I enjoy it. But that is like a really telling moment um, for myself and for others that, that experience it cannot be translated.
yeah.
Um, right? Especially with the phones we have and the way we do it, whatever. But yeah, it's just an interesting thing.
Yeah. I think my when I asked you the question about a lack of balance, the one thing that came to my mind quite quickly was the media. So, how in the media everything is either super good or super bad,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
there doesn't seem to be very much in the way of balance. And I was watching the news in this country just last week, and I found myself thinking, why is it? Because my perception of news is that it's supposed to be fact-based, and it's supposed to present more than one side of an argument, so balanced. But this was kind of it was on our so the BBC News, and yet it was speculative and from one perspective. And I was like, why has this got airtime? It shouldn't be. And so, what are your thoughts on the media and balance? Do you think there is balance generally or not, or what?
That's a great question, or a great topic. I don't believe there is much balance in media. I think there used to be, it seemed like it, um, and this is again completely subjective answer, but I feel like it comes down to, the rankings, and they're private companies, right? Essentially. So let's just go back to the roots. This is a private company, this whatever media empire is showing. So they're gonna have to think about how we're gonna bring in eyes and eventually advertisers, which is the big kind of banks behind it. And so saying the truth sometimes is extremely unsexy. Saying the truth sometimes does not keep us glued, but if we say something a little bit extreme or speculate, create a little bit of fear, create a little bit of excitement, that bumps up. And I think we've seen that more and more.
Yep.
And instead of me being upset about it, I'm not happy about it, but they're a private company and they're trying to make money. And for me, it's not that different from, coming from the medical side. You see nonprofit hospitals that exist that are very large, have so much cash, but they act like a business, and there's reasons they do certain things. And um, instead of getting mad at them or saying that they're altruistic, I said they're a business and they're going to do what they do. I'm not um, giving them any, you know, I just think we have to see it for what it is. How are people incentivized? How are people showing up? So, anyways, I don't know if I really answered much, but I just think it is what it is, and I can only control what I can control. And so, what I put out is hopefully content that is helpful for people and not trying to play on sometimes emotions.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question then regarding balance and the media just one more time. And so if we can assume that everything in the world that happens, probably it's a split of 50-50 between good stuff and not good stuff. Let's just say that.
Hmm.
Do you think that it is good for society that the media can ignore that balance of 50 good, 50 not so good, and report, if they wish, 80% of stuff that's bad and make money out of it? And where I'm coming from here is, you talked earlier about how mindset is so important. And if we are constantly consuming negative news, it shouldn't be any surprise that we cause depression and suicide and bad vibes. So, what are your views on that?
Yeah, I think it's really bad for society because just like we've been talking one on one, it's we spoke about fear, we spoke about challenges, we spoke about every day is kind of an opportunity. And so I feel like the media and news should be along those guidelines, which is reporting the truth, however, encouraging, focusing on things we can control, things we can solve collectively, kind of a call for, hey, let's go do this. And to be frank, and this is the stuff I really nerd out on because I actually really want to build a media, a large media company that has values aligned with it. And so there's a board of directors. It's not like a simple owner of one person where Naveen feels this way, so he's going to guide it. But there's almost like this governance of, hey, we don't have this is our aligned mission, and this is what we're going to essentially report for. We got to be truthful, but we have to be productive. We have to be supportive, And so this has nothing to do with various political lines, but it's an alignment of values, which I think is missing from a lot of organizations. I think it's missing from a lot of political organizations. I think it's missing from media companies. So how I believe and run and invest in businesses, I would want to do for media because I do think there's so much power behind it and how we shape society. So that was a long-winded answer to say I absolutely agree.
Okay. So the event that I mentioned I attended in Italy, it was the World Kindness Movement General Assembly. And as a
Okay.
result of a connection there, we had a follow-up call and we discussed how this guy might create a platform for everything to do with kindness to be in one place and easily accessible by people. And we talked more specifically about could there be an opportunity for there to be a positive media company, whether it be news, TV, radio, whatever. And he's really excited about it. So maybe I should connect the two of you guys.
Yeah, I'd be very excited about that. And yeah, it's how you get in. I mean, if you lead with this is my opinion. If you lead with just kindness and this is going to be a different type of news channel or a different type of media, I'm not sure if that's the way to get a very broad audience, right?
Yep,
Because people will hear the word kind and they're just like, okay, is
yep,
this real,
yep,
right?
yep.
But yes, philosophically, I completely agree with that. And there's a lot of opportunity. And I would love to do that outside of me personally trying to shape the world as one person and be a part of a larger group of people doing this because I think it really makes a difference. And it's why I do not watch the news. It sucks, but I read on my own. I read the Wall Street Journal. I read a lot of things on my own. I do not spend time watching the news because of that. Because of I think it's extremely negative, and you really I feel bummed out for a very productive, optimistic person. Many times, if I watch the news, I will feel bummed out, which is crazy how powerful that can be. So,
Yeah, I've heard other people say this, and I feel a bit of an outsider because I do watch the news and I don't get those feelings that you've described for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. I somehow am able to be quite detached, and I was sharing with somebody the other day. There was a photograph of some, Russian bombing of a Ukraine city, and it was like the red and orange of the flames and the smoke, and obviously a disaster for the people that were there. But I remember thinking, what a fantastic photograph.
hmm.
And that might not sound very um, empathetic, and maybe it's not. But I guess the way that I process that is I can't actually do anything about that. I choose to look at the news, not like slavishly and pore all over it, but I kind of like to have some information about what's going on. Um, and maybe that's not not as useful as you might think, because a little knowledge is dangerous, isn't it? But it's a slightly different approach to yours, which is interesting in itself. So, hmm, I'm just wondering whether you would like to ask your own question about balance, actually, because we can do this in Values Jam. So, ask your own question about balance, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how. And then if you have the answer immediately, you can go first. If you'd like me to go first, then I can, and we can see where that takes us.
How does one start living a balanced life today?
I'm going to give you a kind of not off pat, but an easy answer, which is to know your values. And I believe that that gives you your dinosaur tail. And in that way, whatever happens, you can deal with it and feel pretty comfortable that you've made the choice based on the right basis. And actually, Roy Disney says that when you know your values, decisions are easy. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Um, so I'm sorry it's a bit like, there you go. It wasn't very thoughtful, but that's my immediate response. What about yours?
Um, completely agree with that. I would say know your values and then from your values determine your priorities. And I think the common thing we're talking about is to know thyself, is to spend some time with yourself and discover. And I actually recently have realized that a lot of people do not know their values.
Yeah.
And I recently did this exercise because I was doing a keynote talk for a conference and I was talking about investing in well-being. And so I had to dig down deep and say, this is a little bit of a new topic, even though I feel like I live in a world of well-being and what I do and what I act on and say it's well-being, but I still never spoke about it. So I went to my whiteboard in my office and I literally listed my values. And I even saw a list online because I was like, what are values? Even though I've done this before. So I was like a true student who's never been taught. And I wrote these things down, I circled it, and then I said, yes, these are it. And then I said, what are my priorities? So, anyways, I think everyone should do that. And even if they have done it, maybe you do it again because we're constantly evolving and constantly prioritizing. And only then, or maybe not only, I don't like to use solid, absolute words, but I think that is an important step into understanding and realizing balance.
Yeah, quite right. And so you probably don't know this, but I created an approach called the 31 practices, which can be used at an organizational level and also on a personal level. And the reason it's called 31 practices is because there's no more than 31 days in a month. And the process is that you start with your values and then you translate them into concrete, observable behaviors, 31 of them, and then you focus on just one each day. So, if excellence is something that you is important to you, then it might be that meticulous attention to cleanliness and tidiness is your practice for today. And it might be that you clear up your office because it's starting to get a bit scruffy. Um,
Hmm.
and the neuroscience behind it, it's the conscious daily practice, just embeds the behavior. And then by definition, the values are being lived. So it's really, really simple. That was a great question. Thank you. And so I'm conscious of time and we're going to wrap up. There's always a question at the end, which is in a similar style, which is this. What are you encouraged to do differently about balance as a result of our conversation today?
I'm encouraged to understand the actions I've done to realize my balance is extremely temporary and it won't hurt to kind of solve these problems in different ways. And so I described whiteboarding and things I've done and prioritizing. It doesn't mean it's a reminder to me that it might not always work for me. It might not always work for everyone else. And it's been a reminder that people have different ways and to continuously learn from their ways so we can be balanced sustainably.
Yeah, and I'm similar. So what this has helped me to, and I've value jammed about balance before, but today what's come through in the conversation is that balance is a temporary state, one. And then it's a bit like excellence to me as well. I just mentioned that word, and maybe that's why the two are connecting. But I think of excellence as something that you're always striving for, but never actually achieving. And
Yep.
maybe balance is in that bucket too.
Yeah, I like that. I love that.
All right. So, Naveen, thank you so much for your time today. You're a qualified values jammer, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate it.
Cheers.